Palingenesis by Simon Harewood. Book 3, Heart of the Sear. Chapter 16. The King Has Fallen. Sear sniffed the air, satisfied that it still carried the acrid smell of the ruined dwellings outside the Bellruth wall. The slight stirring of wind was in their favor, and would not betray their presence to the famished swarmlings till they came within sight of the city. Even so, if there was any unexpected movement from that quarter, his scouts would warn the main force to deploy long before the quickest of the creatures could reach them. The sun was about to rise, and this he at least appreciated. Without the ability to penetrate the darkness with his eyes alone, he did not share his tour master's preference for fighting at night. The murk was expedient for surprise attacks or combating a well-disciplined enemy, but with the large-scale operation this day would bring, things could very quickly deteriorate into uncontrollable brawling and send the best-made plans into the abyss. He opted for daylight and control, while assured of the advantage numerically and tactically. The cool air streamed past a quick-moving column of Southerners, stirring the blood. The men moved in silence, a vanguard of potent stealth, eager to show off their prowess and lethal quality. The naked blades of their spears had been darkened with soot, so as not to catch the sunlight and betray their presence to the swarm. All jewelry and trinkets had been removed and left behind in tew. Even the gaudy paint of war had been omitted. Their steps were small and quick, allowing almost noiseless passage. Shoulders were set in eagerness for battle. The failure of their countrymen in Arran had inspired these crack warriors to disprove the growing rumors that the Amul could not stand up to northern soldiers. He remembered the ease with which they had decimated the Ligurian invaders. The well-trained veterans under his command were made of sterner stuff than the hordes that had attacked the west. Already they had left the main force trudging behind them a mile in the rear. Sear wanted his men in position and rested before the order to attack was given. Perhaps the Great One would change his mind when he saw the numbers of swarmlings still surrounding the old castle. Perchance he would send out some of the shifters, robbing the Amul of their prey. If he witnessed the eagerness of the vanguard, prepared to do his bidding, he might relent and let them have the honor of drawing first blood. 2 miles short of Bellruth he halted the long column. Here positions had been prepared for them, to the east and west, straddling the road. Once entrenched in their concealment, it mattered not that the swarm should discover them here, for the onrushing horde would meet their match within a short time. The men watching the road to Gilraeth had not reported any sign of movement from that quarter. Let the Easterners wait their turn. Bellruth would be the first obstacle to overcome in the Northland. Golden rays from the rising sun played over the moving ranks, neatly dividing themselves into 2 columns to flow into a battle line almost a mile in length. He watched them slip past, their shadows long and menacing, and his pulse quickened at the thought of what this day would bring. The messenger stumbled down the hallway in his eager haste, his breath racing. Everyone who witnessed this mad pace realized that something monumental had to have transpired. No one ventured to inquire, however, since this would have been futile. Instead, they fell in behind him, trying their utmost to keep up. He did not pause to knock on the doors of the king's quarters, but shouted at the guards as he approached.
Urgent message for the king! Make way!
The two regarded him for a moment and then raised their spears. It was touch and go, or he impaled himself upon them. His voice betrayed urgency and irritation.
Make way there, fellow! The king will have your head if you delay.
They glared uncertainly, checking him for concealed weapons.
Haste, you dullards! There is not a moment to waste, I say!
Lucain had heard the commotion by now. He had scant interest in the measly breakfast in front of him, even if his innards complained from undernourishment already. His depression mounting with each passing day, the king simply glared at one of his captains in irritation. They moved to investigate. One of the guards was about to knock when the door opened and the pale captain poked his head through. "Keep your voices down, in the name of the king. What is amiss?"
A message, sir. This mad fellow says it is urgent.
The mad fellow did not wait to be asked, but blurted out.
A great host has appeared on the southern road. Let me through to the king.
Even Lucain stirred at this boisterous announcement. The darkness he had felt descending ever since the execution of the questers lifted just a little.
Let him in, you idiots! Out of his way!
He pushed the plate away from him, upsetting the goblet of watered wine. The contents washed unheeded over the table. All eyes were on the door. The interruption had allowed the messenger to catch his breath again. He was still red in the face from the excitement. His very appearance moved the morbid group to a state of piqued interest.
What news, fellow?
Lucain, at least, was still his annoyed self.
A great host, sire. It was spotted but moments ago from the towers on the king's gate, deploying across the southern road. It must have approached from Tew during the night.
The king's eyes narrowed.
How great?
Many thousands, sire. More than twice that of the swarm.
All the men sat bolt upright now. They exchanged astonished glances.
Could you identify what manner of men they are? Surely this many could not come from Gilreth.
He shook his head.
Are you certain of the numbers?
The man nodded without hesitation.
I saw them for myself, sire. The men have sent for you directly to confirm this incredible sight.
The men were on their feet, the king among them.
Lead on, fellow, and pray to Imran that your eyes were not mistaken.
All the men were breathing heavily by the time they had reached the highest level of the watchtower. They pressed in behind Lucain, craning their necks to obtain a clear view of the fields beyond. The two guards on duty pointed down to where the last troops were moving silently into position. The king shielded his eyes against the brilliant morning sunlight just breaking through heavy clouds to the east. Silence overtook the crowded guard room.
They have taken up position on both sides of the road, sire. You can see them from this height, though they have concealed themselves from anyone on ground level.
Will the swarm notice them, do you think?
Not with the air flowing in their direction, my liege. These are experienced and well-trained soldiers. They move with stealth and discipline, and they are certainly aware of the numbers and position of the creatures.
Lucain pondered this, ever more intrigued by the appearance of this strange host.
Did you get a proper look at them before you cowered down? Whence do you think they are?
The man shrugged.
From their appearance alone, I would say they are from the far south, beyond the marshes. Perhaps Lord Malik has allies down there in the jungles.
Lucain was calculating the numbers in his mind.
You believe they number more than 40,000?
All the eyes turned to the watchman.
Yes, sire. Even more than that. I have watched them filing in all this time, in tight ranks, deploying to east and west with perfect order. There can be no mistake.
There were low whistles of incredulity. Lucain remarked out loud.
He has emptied out the southern lands to put so many men in the field.
No one dared voice the one question burning in his mind. Was the Lord of Terrallen here as an ally? Or had he seized the opportunity to strike at the north, made vulnerable by the swarm? Had Turig been right in his calling the marshland lord a traitor? Why then would he deploy his forces against the swarm, and not merely wait till Belruth had been starved into submission? It had to be that he had marched to their aid, that he had come to honor his agreement. The uncertainty gnawed at him. It would be prudent to observe the developments from the safety of the fortress, and if the southern force did mean them harm, they had to hope and pray Gilreth had not been entirely obliterated. Haldred woke confused and perturbed, struggling free from the vestiges of a haunting dream. Still the caverns, she thought, always the dark and unnameable things stirring in the water. For a few moments she could not make sense of her surroundings. She was inside somewhere, but this was not a house or stone palace. A row of beds stretched away into the distance, their slumbering forms breathing quietly. The outline of a crystal symbol glowed dully on the opposite wall. Then she remembered. The small man Hussar had called a vagrant, the strange invitation, the journey up and into the impossibly tall mountain. She was in the towers, her companions and family safely with her, the terrible road from the waste just a memory. She felt refreshed after the good cooked meal of the night before, and wondered what hour it could be. There was no telling without a window on the outside world. Here and there an empty bed confirmed that not all the company was still asleep. To judge by her appetite, it had to be morning already. Arid appeared in the doorway. He glanced tentatively in her direction and smiled when he saw she was awake and watching him. It was a heart-warming sight, her boy running to her bedside in this secure place, far from the threat that had almost consumed them.
You have to get up now. Everybody's at the table.
She smiled.
You mean to have your breakfast without me? And who's everybody? Look at all these still sleeping.
She pointed at the other beds, realizing for the first time that they were mostly empty.
Everybody. Hussar and Cura, Maris.
Even Maris?
Yes, there are physicians here that helped him. He's much better. And the Lord wants to meet you.
The Lord?
The Sear.
Oh.
Haldred was suddenly a little apprehensive. The Seer was as mythical as the swarm had been, and far more enigmatic. She was overcome with curiosity.
Well, if you will fetch me the water pitcher over there, I can make myself presentable for this Lord.
He looked at her oddly.
You are always presentable. They're all waiting.
Haldred threw back the covers.
Fetch the water, or they'll wait even longer.
Her shoes were so dusty it made her wince. Both pairs she had brought from Arrows were already travel-worn, not being made for such rigorous use as she had put them to. Even in the low light of the dining hall, she felt sure everyone would notice. At least she had donned the best of her frocks, the only ones still relatively clean. It was a deep burgundy in color, with off-white edging and flaring sleeves. Not very practical, but it had been impossible to leave behind for the strumpets of the pirate lords. Arid half-dragged her along among trestle tables laden with dishes of broth, cheeses, and loaves, as well as large tankards and piles of dried fruit, impatient to reach their destination. She glanced at the people sharing all this bounty, smiling, laughing even, the remnants of nations almost eradicated from the face of Myrol. He stood out among the others, the strange man of the towers, with his white hair and expressionless face. Above all, his eyes, when they rested upon her, were disconcerting in the intensity of their gaze, as if her secrets were all uncovered in a moment. Next to him sat a fair, sad-faced boy with his chin cupped in his hands, apparently not paying attention to what was going on around him. At the sight of this child, she slowed as if to stop, causing her son to turn back to reprimand her once more. Eric was about to say something, but he noticed her peculiar expression and what she was looking at. He glanced from one to the other, puzzled. Hussar rose to his feet, smiling as always. He beckoned her closer, motioning to a seat apparently reserved for her. She looked round the table mechanically, nodding to everyone there, aware all the time of the eyes of the Seer, and that odd boy now also, upon her. Hussar made the introductions.
Princess Haldred of Ligerium, Lord Veer of the Towers, and Gareth Seth Rune, whom we have to thank for our timely rescue.
She curtsied to the Seer, who had risen to his feet, and nodded to Gareth. For an instant their eyes met. She felt the shock of recognition. This was indeed the son of the exile. He had the same intensity about him, the same compelling honesty and depth of feeling. This was the child for whom he had crawled into the abyss to fetch him back. This first impression was enough to make her understand why. Once she was seated and Cura insisted on piling all manner of sustenance on her empty plate, most of the awkwardness disappeared. The Seer politely allowed her to eat her fill before pursuing any topic that required participation from her side. Sear spoke of Breck and the goings-on in Lysan, carefully hinting that the real heroics had taken place in the wasted lands to the east, where the swarm had been birthed at the instruction of the marshland lord. Haldred marveled to think that the four involved in that desperate attempt to interfere with Heckan Sear's schemes were now seated at that very table. Maris, still in considerable discomfort, looked down at his plate to avoid the eyes of the others. Cura had gained a little color and was nervously toying with the ties of her gown. Arid regarded the merchant with a slightly puzzled frown, as if he had no idea what the man was talking about. When finally she was free to join the conversation, Veer asked her directly about the caverns at Frane's Point, the methods employed to conjure such a vast swarm from the waste, and how it came about that they had managed to escape the place. For an hour she relived the dark, desperate times in the tent city, the caverns with their horrid occupants, the breeding pools, and those urns of powder slowly sinking into the murky water. Even in this place, so far from the terror of those fearful days, she still shuddered at the memories. The Seer listened in silence, his gaze never leaving her face. When she spoke of Breck and Melvor, the boy at her side looked at her sharply. She heard his voice for the first time.
Captain Melvor, the commander of the Royal Guard? Yes. I suppose you know him, since you lived in Belruth.
He was not with you in the boats. Has he?
She shook her head, anticipating what he was about to ask.
No, he was fine when last we saw him in Varus. He left us to make his way with his men into Nuria, there to lend what aid he could to the people. I do not know what has become of him.
She saw the concern in his face and continued.
He is a friend of yours?
Gareth hesitated, then shrugged.
I wanted to be, but we never had the time. I'm glad he was with you.
So am I. Sear will tell you that we never would have reached Ligurium without his aid.
She completed the account of their journey from Breck to the coast, the pursuit, the close escapes, the fortunate encounters. When she related the part where the wounded swarmling had accosted her in the inn, Arid and the others looked at her reproachfully. Wandering off by herself had been supreme folly, and nearly cost her dearly. Sear and Cura helped a bit during the telling of the rest, since her memories were not too clear on the days spent in Arius, and she had not the heart to talk about the death of Tregoran. Finally, there was the dramatic encounter with Johin, and the rescue by Rune. She told this last section while looking directly at the boy opposite her. There was the shadow of a smile on his face at the end of it.
Please accept our gratitude, Gareth, for sending the soldiers to our aid. We all owe you our lives.
The boy had actually flushed scarlet.
I didn't do that.
He mumbled.
I just told my father what I saw in the dream.
And had you not had such a fortuitous dream,
Remarked Sear.
he never would have known we had need of his exceptional skills.
We have expressed our thanks to him for rushing out of his way to rescue us, but I am glad to have the opportunity to thank you also.
Continued Haldred. There was a real smile now, a little shy on the still embarrassed face. This was an endearing child, she thought.
While we are on the topic of expressing gratitude,
Said Lord Veer.
the people of the north owe you a great debt, Haldred of Ligurium, you and your brave companions. Were it not for your intervention on their behalf, Belruth would be nothing more than a desolate shell right now, and the entire Northland devastated. Perhaps the Shadow would have marched his cohorts directly to Gilreth to mop up the few that remained there. Either way, Arryn would have faced the might of Tiralan by themselves, and we would never have had the opportunity to strike at the beast while he exposed himself before the walls of the city. What is about to unfold was brought about by your hand, yours and every other hand that poured the lethal substance into that pool.
He looked around the table at Maris, Cura, and Arid, till finally his eyes rested on Haldred again. He addressed all of them.
Rest here till you are sure of your destination. The towers are at your disposal whenever you may have need. Sith will see to your comfort and make sure you lack for nothing.
He rose to his feet.
We will make the most of this chance. The forces to oppose Lord Malik are almost in position.
Gareth suddenly stood up also, as if he was about to interrupt. Haldred noticed the distant stare in his unfocused eyes. Veer paused to look at him, his brows arched in a question.
Wait.
The boy had grown pale before their eyes. He swayed on his feet. A hand went up to clutch at his throat. Veer stepped forward to hold him steady. Even his voice had taken on a strange quality.
It has started. The destroyer is before the gates of Belruth.
He gasped as if in pain.
Oh, we must go.
He looked up at the Sear, a tear trickling from the corner of an eye. Veer was ready. He had been expecting this announcement. All the waiting and preparation was over. His voice was calm and self-assured.
Ranald must be warned. They are not within range yet. Find Prince Rune and let him know. I will instruct the men of Gilreth.
He turned back to the staring group round the table.
Please, make yourselves comfortable here. I have to take my leave. May the sunrise find us free of the shadow and these deviants.
He nodded to them and steered the unresisting boy away from them to the nearest doorway. Haldred felt some of the apprehension of the trail settle round her once more as she watched them go. Gareth leaned against the stone wall of the passage. His knees were still weak, as if his body had suddenly grown too heavy to support. He was alone, the urgent instructions of the Seer still ringing in his ears. And there, on the horizon of his consciousness, rose the storm clouds of the Shadow Lord's vengeance, the mere awareness of which would make him cower and weep, frantically looking for a place to hide till it was past. He searched for Rune, half afraid of finding him, of sending him rushing headlong into that nightmarish maelstrom of violence and hate. The man knew immediately that something was wrong. Gareth made no attempt to hide his perturbation.
What is the matter?
The boy wondered if this would be the last time he felt that warmth, that welcome of spirit most precious in all the world.
The battle has started. The two are before the gates of Belruth.
There were anguished moments of silence. Finally, the other's thought rose in his mind.
So soon? We will have no time to prepare. Is Gilreth in position?
Lord Veer is urging them forward right now.
We are still more than 30 miles away. It is not possible to reach the city today and be able to engage the enemy. If we hurry greatly, we can be in the proximity by midnight. The earliest opportunity for attack is sunrise.
There was no immediate response to his thought.
Gareth, take heart, boy. We have some surprises for them, too.
Will I see you before the attack?
Perhaps. It matters not. I know you will be there. Stay out of danger. Find a place where you can watch the thing play itself out, and you can warn me when the time comes to chase down the beast. Gareth?
Yes, I will. I will be there. I will find you on the field.
I will find you, he thought to himself, and I will not let anything happen to you. The waiting was over for the men of Gilreth also. Count Byram stepped out of his tent, the intensity of the seer's thought and instruction still before his eyes. Outside on the gentle hill, Genesis had brought a carpet of flowers to decorate the sweeping green. A sunlit world of promise and peace lay about the war pavilions of the host. Even the evidence of the vicious battle that had taken place here but days before had all but faded from the landscape. Garoline raised his eyebrows as his father came into view. By the expression on the face of the latter, he was certain that this time there would be news of import. He experienced a quick stir of excitement. The dreadful accounts they had from Melvor about the annihilation of the southern kingdoms had made them appreciate, more than anything heretofore, the dire situation they were in. The extent of Malik Yulian's scheme, the intensity of his hatred, and the meticulous preparation for this final hour of vengeance had been brought home to them by an eyewitness to the prelude. The tiny wavelet, the ripple of that storm they had weathered, appeared insignificant now. The eagerness he had entertained to rush forward to Belruth at the head of this well-prepared host had been tempered into caution, and the willingness to wait for the instruction from the towers that would employ the forces of Gilraeth to best advantage. Any premature move on their part could easily spell disaster for all of Nuria and the north. Byrand frowned at him for a moment and then shook his head. He sat down in a folding chair next to his son.
Well,
Garoline inquired.
do we march yet?
We march, came the long-anticipated reply.
Really? You were given orders to proceed to Belruth?
Byrand nodded, raising his eyebrows. There is much to tell you. I hardly know where to commence. He leaned back and let his gaze travel over the peaceful encampment. I have great news, some of which is hardly credible, even though it came from a source beyond doubt. We have gained unlikely allies in our struggle against the Tuller. Ranald of Arran has arrived in Nuria with a host of 40,000. He is as close as Lunvir. Garoline was too astonished to interrupt. His astonishment was about to be multiplied. Moreover, he brings additional forces from the Witch Isle, led by a Viran no less, as well as more than 1,000 of our countrymen who have escaped annihilation at the hands of Lord Malik in the far south. He kept thousands of our kin as slaves, and worse, hidden away from sight in the forests, apparently to serve as a diversion for his boundless hate, till such time as he could overcome the rest of us. Only his plans for them have miscarried. Now they have come north to aid us in opposing him. There are those among them that can wield the blade in its proper uses, though they are inexperienced and young. More than 50. Garoline whistled through his teeth.
That is amazingly good news. If they attack from Longvir while we attack from the east, we can trap the enemy between us.
Byrand smiled ruefully. We will have to coordinate our attack with theirs, but I don't know who will be doing the trapping. The enemy host is still several times the size of ours, and there is more than one fire-breather among them. We will have our work cut out to deal with those. But there is more. Prince Rune has joined our cause at last. He is with the host in the west. Garoline's face lit up.
Has he?
Byrand nodded. He is fully converted to the art. This should be something to see. He smiled. But we have preparations to make. As we speak, the Tuller are gathering before the gates of Belruth. We cannot expect poor Lucane to hold them off for long. He must be shaking in his skin already, even with the thousands of swarmlings between him and the enemy. He laughed without mirth. How he must berate himself for being Malik's dupe, with that thick-skulled father of his for all these cycles. Both men rose to their feet.
When will Ranald be in position to attack?
Asked Gary. Not before early tomorrow morning. We will have to hurry even so. Rested or not, I would want the men to get a few hours' sleep before we rush in.
It is best to let the Tuller commit themselves first to an attack on the city. They will be set up for an assault on the walls, with both their flanks exposed. We should not give them an opportunity to form up in ranks facing us. In that way, their superior numbers may not avail them. If we attack simultaneously from the sides, we can roll up the entire force and have them running before noon.
Byrand regarded his son with surprise. You think it will be that easy? We were warned that there are battle priests among them, not to mention the beasts. Do you think we could catch them by surprise? That Malik is unaware of us? He may even know that we have turned back to the art. I have it from the Sear that the strength of the western host may be the only thing Malik has not prepared for. The best strategy would be to draw the Tuller host after us and give Ranald the opportunity of striking them in the rear. We should attack a little before they do. Get the enemy to commit their main power against us, feign a retreat, and make a stand in prepared positions. Only we will have no time to prepare these positions, he added. But you know the terrain around Belruth very well. Is there a feature east of the city, say a mile away, that may be of use to us? A place to set up the war machines and conceal them from sight? Garrelane appeared thoughtful.
Within a mile, there isn't much. Heinz Rise? That is a little to the north, and perhaps a mile and a half. Too far out of the way?
Byran considered this. He was familiar with the place, having done part of his training in the area. A forest at Rise, located northeast of the city, it had been a favorite exercise ground for the sergeants, since it offered rough and rocky terrain on a gentle slope. It could be possible to drag his machines up there and conceal them among the rocks. It may serve us very well, Heinz Rise. Who would have thought it could be useful for more than wearing out the legs of Nurian cadets? There is concealment enough to keep the smaller machines out of sight. The larger ones we will leave in plain view, much closer to the action, and allow them to be overrun. Malek will believe our feint ought to have ended there. He will not suspect a second line of defense exists higher up the slope. Now it was Garrelane's turn to look surprised.
You believe the deceiver can be deceived?
Blyrand nodded. He is overconfident by now, believing his plan has succeeded, even beyond expectation. He knows Aaron is marching, but with the numbers at his command, they can be held off till he has dealt with us. He will expect us to break, or retreat at least. He will also expect some sort of prepared position of defense, where we will attempt to make a stand. Let him overrun that position, and his confidence will rob him of caution. I do not envision an easy retreat, or even a reprieve, during which we may reorganize our ranks. They will press us hard, eager to destroy us in detail. Yet we must hold there to give the men of Aaron and our allies an opportunity to gain the advantage at the other end of the field. Garrelane thought this over while his father spoke, forming a picture of the coming conflict in his mind. The strategy was a risky one, but then, with sheer might, they had little hope of prevailing. The fire-breathers would wreak havoc on their battle formations, unless the creatures could be surprised in some way. What better opportunity for that than when the beasts would swoop in on the fleeing host for the kill? The tour would be charging pell-mell over broken terrain, their advantage of numbers temporarily negated.
We should leave the greater part of the archers on the hill, especially the young ones,
he suggested.
They will be of far greater use there, and may not be able to keep up with a speedy retreat. Also, a dozen of the best blades for a powerful counterattack. This will give our men a chance to form a line among the rocks. The arrows will keep their foremost ranks at bay for a while, maybe long enough for our slayer squads to deal with the shifters.
Provided they have only 3 of those, Byrand interjected.
Of course,
responded Gary, the frown returning to his brow.
Could they have more?
The entire camp was left as it was, the men taking only what they would need for 3 days on the road. They would sleep in their cloaks, the weather no longer being too cold. The companies moved down in sequence in their proper order. It was amazing how the order to march after the interminable wait transformed them into a disciplined host, almost eager to press forward into danger. The victory over the swarm had boosted their morale and fighting spirit like no amount of training or preparation could have done. Ever forward surged the 7 columns with their designated champions in the lead. An 8th, consisting of the 1,200 archers, came behind, twice as long as any of the others. In the rear marched the 100 blades, protecting the slower-moving war machines that had been partially dismantled for ease of transportation. There was little ammunition for the larger ones, but this mattered not, since these were to be used as decoys only. Malvor had been placed in charge of the engines. The few days he had spent in preparation had hardly given him a working knowledge of the art. He had found the change almost overwhelming. Yet the obvious quality and motivation of the men from Gilreth had served as an inspiration, and the long trail from Breck had removed any inhibitions he had previously harbored. The fearsome power of the blade at his side was still intimidating, and for him something to be used only in dire need. The wagons and men carrying the war engines were divided into 3 groups, 100 in each, picked from among the strongest of the spears. They were rotated regularly to keep up a steady pace, allowing those not employed to rest while the others labored. Malvor moved from one group to the next, encouraging men here and there, sharing a friendly word or listening to a complaint. The men were aware of his reputation from before, that of a flint-like taskmaster, and marveled that this could be the same man they had seen at the head of the Royal Nurian Guard during cycles past. For his part, Malvor kept glancing at the ingenious contraptions with which these soldiers hoped to slay the reputed fire-breathing flyers of the tour. The sturdy ballistae were mounted on large discs that could be swiveled about with ease, rotating the weapon in any direction or elevation within moments. He had seen the bolts with their barbs that would open when the head pierced an object, lodging itself in the target. These would be aimed at the wings at short range, with the slender ropes attached to their tails anchored round trees or large stakes driven into the ground. A beast thus brought low could be assailed from all sides by the blade masters designated for this task. These select few wore specially designed armor that covered the entire body, clumsy affairs with a slit in the visor covered by chrysolite. Though they would be robbed of agility, the armor could withstand tremendous heat at long range. Malvor was glad to know he would not have to find out how resistant it was at short range. He was not even sure if the blades these men carried could harm such abominations as the tour would deploy against them. Each Slayer squad had 3 of these machines, making a total of 9. The remaining 14 smaller engines were mostly slinging types that would pour fragile vessels filled with pitch over the advancing enemy. These would only be useful at range. The bigger machines, 11 in number, including a monster that could launch 10 spears simultaneously over great distance, required more than half his group to handle. Ox carts carried the heaviest substructures, with barrows and hand carts bringing along pieces of the dismantled mechanics. He was thoroughly impressed by the meticulous preparation of Gilreth to meet this supreme challenge. If Nuria would fail in the end, it would not be for lack of effort. Lucane could not tear himself away from the scene below. He kept watching in fascination, numbering the impossibly potent force from the south. The longer he watched them, and the care they took to remain concealed, the more he believed Malik's soldiers had come to honor the alliance and relieve the fortress. Perhaps the Marshland Lord had known something about the coming scourge, and had even kept his forces out of the path of peril, but who could blame him for that? Not even the fine host below could have faced the vast numbers he had seen obliterate the Ligerians and Nurians at Store. And the swarm would have been so much stronger still when passing close to Terrellin. No, the Southern Lord had merely bided his time, waiting for the opportune moment to defeat this unimaginable threat. His prudence had cost Ligerium and Nuria dearly, But now he had arrived to make good on all those promises of friendship. As soon as the swarmings were overcome by their savior from the swamps, he would venture out to welcome the rescuers in person. The walls and battlements were lined with every last occupant of the castle. People pressed forward to catch a glimpse of what was about to unfold, having multiplied the rumors of a relieving force to gargantuan proportions. Half of them expected the Swamp Lord to roll up in a gilded carriage with trumpets blaring. His mere presence would be sufficient to send the rampaging swarmings fleeing back from where they had come. Excitement reigned everywhere, creating the festival atmosphere. After all the dark, despairing days, they were going to win through to survive the massive onslaught. Neighbors chatted together, pointing to where the line of shrub on the southern road supposedly concealed the host of Lord Malik. Among them stood an aged man in plain dress, one of his hands missing the greater part of its fingers. At his side was a boy of 15 cycles, dressed in the scarlet surcoat of the Royal Guard. In contrast to those around them, they seemed to lack enthusiasm, even wearing frowns of apparent concern. The old one wrinkled his nose as if smelling something peculiar as he addressed the boy in low tones.
Do you feel it, then?
What, Euban?
There was a sharp look.
There is something amiss with this whole affair. If they are so mighty indeed, why the secrecy? Are they hiding from the swarm or from us?
The boy shrugged.
We won't know whether we have been liberated or betrayed till the king makes a decision. I guess it will be too late then to do anything about it. I don't trust anything they do anymore, ever since they had Gareth murdered in the hills.
Keep your voice down,
Whispered the old man urgently.
unless you want to be murdered yourself.
He pulled the boy by the sleeve back from the press.
Judging by this lot,
He motioned to the enthusiastic crowd with his crippled hand.
Lucain will welcome the Southerners with open arms. What little defense we have will be willingly sacrificed.
A new burst of excitement from the people made them look back sharply. Some were pointing to the southern road again, smiling and cheering. Another column of marching men had appeared, making its way in the direction of the castle. Though nothing as impressive as the first was reported to be, this was the first proper glimpse most had had of a real relieving force. Now all the wild speculation was confirmed in their eyes as fact. Euban spoke close to Den's ear.
Your eyes are stronger than mine. What manner of men are these newcomers?
The boy shielded his eyes from the brightness of the morning glare. He did not reply for a while, and then ventured,
I know not. Nothing about them seems familiar to me.
Euban frowned with impatience.
Describe them to me.
They have no particular color of dress, no surcoats with emblems that stand out. The helms are few and varied in appearance, as if these men are not furnished with equipment from the same stores. They carry spears, I think. Yes, and I see no pennants.
The old man scratched his chin suspiciously.
What can you tell me about their legs?
Their legs.
Yes. Are the coverings loose and flappy or tight-fitting like hose?
Ah, they appear loose. Yes, I believe they are.
Euban froze. He drew the boy back again and spoke in low, urgent tones.
Ravens. You can be sure that something is wrong now. There is no reason for those scum to appear unless it is for loot. They will not leave their rotting homes out of the goodness of their black hearts and march all this way to help a neighbor. They have come to pick the flesh off the carcass of Nuria.
Den stared at him in alarm.
Should we go to the king?
Euban regarded him as if he had lost his mind.
What? Do you think that madman will listen to the likes of us? Have you forgotten what he has done to the priests?
Then what are we to do?
Find a hole in which to hide. The city may not see the sun setting this day.
Eruakir watched the ragtag column approaching from the south. At first he could not place the strange appearance of these newcomers, and almost ordered his men to prepare an ambush. The noisy advance could compromise their position and give them away to the swarm. Yet he realized that an engagement would bring about the same result. He sent a messenger to order them to halt if they valued their lives. Whether they were some Ligurian militia or the remnants of a Nurian garrison, their numbers were not sufficient to withstand the remaining swarmlings. Judging by their appearance and the lack of bearing, these men were only casual soldiers, and not used to wielding arms in this manner. At least they had the sense to stop when the messenger reached them. Yet now they stood about in plain sight instead of leaving the road. He shook his head at such stupidity. It was only when the messenger returned to him that he realized who these scarecrows were. This was the venerable Lord Zebar's Sea Raven army. Eduok here sighed to himself. It would be better for these sea rats to stay out of the action to come. He was sure they would only get in the way. Johin was tired and footsore, unaccustomed as he was to dragging himself overland for such distances. He almost regretted the bargain he had made with Lord Rune. Yet now that the city walls of Belruth had finally appeared in front of them, his resolve returned also. The Sea Raven column numbered just over 5,000 men, an impressive force for the Isles. The quality of their weapons and armor was as varied as their appearances, ranging from serviceable equipment looted in Ligurium to the dregs scrounged from dockside alehouses in Kilvest. The best items were claimed by the Track Islanders themselves, while fully half their number had to make do with whatever they had been given. These last were Ligurians or slaves from various races pressed into service as pretend soldiers in order to bolster the numbers of the so-called host. Apparently, Zebar did not expect to do much actual fighting. Yet for the sake of claiming a portion of the rich spoils after the battle, he had to field as many soldiers as he could find. Johin knew that these fake warriors would run at the first opportunity. They needed little encouragement from him, though he had been at work among them ever since joining the band in Kilvest. If they could not be counted on to fight their masters during the battle, at least they would not strike a blow against the Nurians. An impressive-looking Southlander appeared at the head of their column. He wore a spectacular battle mask with dark metal horns at least a foot in length. The man had to be a commander of some sort, moving about with aggressive authority, an awe-inspiring figure. He was clearly irritated with the presence of the ravens, and chased them off the road and into the trees and shrubs to the west, instructing them to remain out of sight if they valued their hides. This was more or less what Zebar had hoped for. He moved the column without protest. They had barely cleared the road when the main body of the tour host came into view from the south. From where he sat propped against the sapling, Johin grew increasingly astonished. There appeared to be no end to the marching column. He understood suddenly why Zebar had not hesitated to join this side of the struggle. The Swamp Lord had assembled irresistible forces for his campaign of conquest. The massive host halted before they reached the seated ravens, well short of the vanguard. There was a pause during which they lowered their shields and spears, passed around waterskins and baskets of food. The men seemed confident, chatting in low tones or standing about as if they already owned the field. There could be little doubt in their minds that they were to be the masters of the day. Soon a party approached from the rear on the side of the column. Men stopped their casual conversations and straightened up as the dignitaries passed by. Johin felt the atmosphere change, even at that range. The tall guards, the dark armor. He suspected at once that this had to be the Great One himself. The imposing southerner bowed as the group came up to him. Zebar hurried over and bowed as low in his turn. His groveling convinced the young man that here the architect of Nuria's demise had finally arrived. Hiruokir straightened up at the command of his lord. He ignored the pretentious raven lord next to him, waiting for Horan to dismiss this irritation. It would not take long. Malik frowned at the Sea Raven lord.
You have brought the track host with you.
Yes, my lord.
Zebar said proudly.
5,000 first-rate spears at your disposal.
Good. You will watch the western approach.
At the first sign of an enemy host, send word to me. Wait till we have entered the city and the swarmlings are vanquished before you move, or there may be little left of your first-rate spears.
Zebar could not decide whether the meaning was sarcastic or not.
As you desire, great lord.
He bowed and retreated a few paces. Malik addressed himself to the commander.
Report.
My men are in position to lure out the swarm, Great One. The creatures are starved and should not present a problem. Do we have permission to proceed?
Malik nodded curtly.
Pick a reserve from among the main body and set them up just in case. Then the field is yours.
Eduokir did not allow his expression to show his elation. Instead, he bowed once more and backed away respectfully. As soon as he was out of the circle of dignitaries, his manner became all businesslike. Messengers were sent to alert the men all along the line. The swift sentry that would serve as bait moved to the road. The commander himself marched back to the main column, where he selected 5,000 of the best warriors. 1,000 would go out to back up each flank, in case some swarmlings attempted to peel off the main press to get behind his formation. The remaining 3,000 he grouped in the center to deploy wherever they might be needed. When the reserves were in position, he ordered the drummers to start, and the leading group to set off on their mission. 100 men trotted forward, their spears at the ready. Shields had been left behind to allow for swifter movement. They were wary, watching the road ahead intently. Though they were not supposed to engage the creatures, a premature withdrawal would be a waste of time and brand them forever as cowards. The commander would be severe in his punishment. The trudging group approached to within a mile before they were spotted. The gutted outbuildings of the town outside the walls were closing in on them, and they were growing concerned when a sharp, bark-like cry from a rooftop warned them of the presence of the swarm. The men halted, brandishing their spears. Eyes stared in every direction. There were furtive movements among the ruins, and an odd noise started up, increasing every moment in intensity. It was as though a hive of hornets had been disturbed. The first figures appeared, crowding into the streets, their clawed feet clipping on the cobblestones. Still the warriors stood their ground. Behind them the drums grew louder. The vanguard had noticed their stand. A bigger creature appeared among the rest, screaming insanely. There was direction now, as dozens more poured out from the sides, at once trying to cut off the group from retreat. The men backed away, slowly at first, but then with increasing speed as they saw the intentions of the swarmlings. To these creatures, they were no more than prey, to be hunted and consumed. Driven on by hunger and bloodlust, hundreds of creatures now took to the road, shoving and jostling one another in their eagerness to get at the fleeing men. These last were running by now, panic closing in on them despite their rigorous training and elite status. The beasts after them could not be intimidated or cowed into retreat. They would pursue till they perished. The swiftest runners hung back at first not to appear too eager to reach their waiting line. But soon the deafening clamor of death gaining on them was too much to ignore. Suppressed fear broke to the surface and spurred them on to race ahead of their comrades. Some even dropped their spears, forgetting the disgrace to which they would be subjected on gaining the line. The Amol elite did not use bows or slings. Such weapons were for cowards and thieves, dishonoring the warrior who made use of them. They did use throwing spears in certain circumstances, when an enemy remained beyond immediate reach. This day, though, the enemy would come right to them, and would be treated with respect. The massive formation rose up from the brush as the first of the runners passed through. The drums thundered above the screaming, raging horde bearing down on them. War cries rose from 50,000 throats. Far away on the walls of Belruth, the Nurians marveled at the sight, and Lugain caught his breath in the lookout tower. The swarm took no notice, however, and did not hesitate or slow at the sight of such force ahead. The first bodies slammed into the Amul ranks, hacking, clawing in frenzied violence. Before these could be properly overcome, more pressed in, spreading down the line in both directions, their animal speed and ferocity driving the warriors onto the back foot. The enraged creatures of the back threw themselves over the top of their comrades, to land screaming among the spears. Eduokir watched in alarm as his line shuddered under the impact. Here and there it buckled dangerously, giving way before the tremendous onslaught. He looked behind him at the reserves he did not want to commit. It would be a dishonor to seek aid from the main host to overcome an enemy less than half the size of his force. Quickly he sent the runners to the flanks. It was time to close the trap. There were cheers on the walls of Belruth now. The disgusting creatures that had tormented them for so long, that had occupied their dwellings and despoiled their town, were outmatched by such a fine host as Lord Malik had brought with him. They blessed his name and memory, singing and shouting in their happiness. Even in the tower, Lupain glowed at the sight of their deliverance, promising to empty the treasury in gratitude for such a tremendous show of solidarity. He well remembered the mad ferocity of the beasts, and could appreciate the struggle in the plain below. Even if they were starved, these creatures possessed the strength and savagery of brutes. The wings of the great Amul line were closing in. The swarm did not make any attempt to escape the encirclement, but pressed forward instead, almost aiding the warriors in their maneuver. The fighting along the line was tremendous. Warriors frenziedly struck with shield and spear to keep the raking, tearing claws from finding their mark. Yet many were going down, bleeding profusely from gaping wounds. In the press of bodies, the longer spears were of less advantage than in open formations, and the men in the front now reached their targets with difficulty. However, the ranks of the swarmlings were thinning rapidly as soon as the warriors dropped spears for war clubs and could strike at shorter range. A concerted charge from the flanks took the momentum out of the assault, and the Amul line no longer retreated in the center. Not a single creature escaped the slaughter. Perhaps half an hour after the first sighting, the engagement was over, and the thousands of beasts exterminated. Edukir counted the cost proudly. The main host had witnessed the bravery and worth of his warriors firsthand. The savage battle had sparked dismay in every beholder. Not a man among the marshlanders desired to have been in it. More than 800 of his warriors were either dead or too badly hurt to participate in future battles for a 10-day or more. There were countless minor wounds besides, from broken fingers to scrapes and cuts that had to be cleaned thoroughly to prevent infection. Yet the goal had been achieved, not only in ridding themselves of the swarmlings, but the display of such potency had made an overwhelming impression on the spectators on the walls of Belruth. Lucain breathed easy again. All the madness, all the oppression of the last season passed from him. He had been right all along, so had his father. The Southland Alliance was the only one that endured. Ligerians were good for nothing but underlings and servants. Only the Marshland Lord was an equal in might and initiative. Here now he had proved it, vindicating their faith in him. He watched smiling from the tower as the spindly bodies were dragged onto a massive pile for burning. The Amul commander he recognized, having witnessed his exploits against the inept Ligerian host in the Tristwood. From the platform he had seen the assault carry the wall and gate of the hastily erected fortification, the impressive figure in his horned battle mask leading all the way. Now the wretched beasts that had humiliated him and destroyed the pride of Nuria, their king and greatest warriors, had the same judgment meted out to them. How it thrilled him to witness this vengeance! How he exulted in the broken corpses and the slow flames as they were kindled to consume this nightmare. He did not wait for the party from the liberating host to approach the walls of the city. Rushing down from the tower, he gave orders for the remaining men of rank or station to assemble inside the king's gate. He would meet the great southern lord outside, and under general acclaim escort him into the city in person. From this day, Malik Yulian would have the freedom of any town or hamlet in Nuria. Youthful and inexperienced as they were, had been the only group to keep together during that interminable morning. Rune looked about him with pride and admiration. There were no complaints, no sighs or expressions of woe, despite the mad pace they were setting. Not one lagged behind. Each one looked out for his fellow, encouraging one another with silent exchanges, a touch, a quick meeting of the eyes. Perhaps they had more reason than the other soldiers not to be separated from their fellows. This country was strange to them. Their supposed homeland did not hold familiar scenes or promises of comfort. To be left behind in the company of strangers had to be an intimidating prospect. Even so, they were earning not only his respect, but also that of the Inrathians and Aaronites. Every hour they halted for a breather, preferably in a shaded place or close to water. Quickly the marching packs were lowered to the ground, little parcels of food came out and were shared around. The younger boys in Lund's group with their black surcoats, adorned with the amber eye, kept close to him, making sure he was included in the doling out of refreshments. Rune caught them often staring at the blade, now riding on his back, and he recalled that one of these two had discovered it in Malik's hideaway. They were just children to look at, he realized, and without them he would simply be joining the slaughter without hope of victory. He thought of Haldred and her efforts in the breeding caves, how the weak and vulnerable had contributed to the battle ahead of them. It was as though all of these little stitches were woven into a grand design, a master plan with an orchestrator somewhere behind the scene. The Viran were ready to push on. He took a last quick gulp of water, lifted the pack to his shoulders, and stepped back onto the road. Behind him he could feel the eyes of his two shadows fixed on the blade. A little smile creased his face. By noon the miles had already been halved. They would reach the vicinity of Belruth well before midnight. Ranald called a halt to have a decent rest and a meal, as well as wait for the stragglers to catch up again. A cool breeze wafted in from the north, welcomed by the hot and weary host as they dropped their packs and sagged down in the shade along the side of the road. The column was spread out over several miles by now, yet the Viran still stubbornly clung together near the front. Rune had the impression that Lund was hardly fatigued. The cycles of training as a runner had to stand him in good stead. There were no fires for cooking. The men did not mind dry rations as long as they had a while to rest and refresh themselves. Most wanted to do as little as possible during this break, savoring the inactivity. Rune sat down with Lund and Vruthael, the staring boys in attendance. At least these last two were willing enough, fetching him water or fruit when he felt the need. It was remarkable how different they were from the ragged urchins he had first met on the road in the marshlands. Apart from the change in appearance the uniforms and northern garb lent them, there was also no longer that fixed apprehensive stare in their eyes, as if they expected every person they encountered to be an enemy. He watched them eating their uninspiring meal with relish, these ex-slaves from the south, and enjoyed their lack of sophistication, their simple spontaneity. 3 of the 4 also wore the chrysolite septalia, setting them apart at least as candidates for the marvel of composed armor. He wondered how successful they were at it, especially Brennick, who was young even to carry a blade. Perhaps it would be easier for them to express being less plagued by memories of disdainful deeds in the past to undermine assurance. For these youths, with no shameful crimes on their consciences, the glittering life locked in those symbolic patterns might be much more readily accessible. Even if none of them had fallen far enough to fathom the redemptive undertones of the Sear, they would be far better protected from potential harm. Lund noticed a strange distant look in the eyes of the exile. He wondered suddenly about this man, who was a prince in the Northland, yet had wandered foreign trails with his young son in tow.
You are the brother of the dead king?
His statement startled Rune back to the present. He stared at the youth for a moment before replying.
Yes. I alone remain of the 3 sons of Alberad, king of Nuria. I cannot say the man you refer to did any credit to the position of king. He was utterly blind to the schemes of the Shadow, even as we all were. Yet he never sought an opportunity to be reacquainted with the art.
Even as he spoke the words, Rune recalled his own stubborn resistance to the legacy of his people. If he had not been driven to that crisis upon the sea.
But he was no brother to me, coveting the girl promised to me, falsely accusing me for the murder of Albarad's third son, which he had perpetrated, and finally banishing me from the kingdom for all time.
He smiled ruefully.
I am here right now in direct contravention of the king's law.
Lund regarded him with something close to understanding.
This boy Gareth, who can do such extraordinary things, that girl was his mother.
Rune nodded.
I did not know this till shortly before we met you in the marshes. When I lost her, a part of me died, or at least I tried to drown it, all the while knowing she was alive still and belonging to another.
Lund wore a frown of incomprehension.
But she was yours as soon as the child was conceived. She could never belong to anyone else after that. Surely she was not unaware.
To his surprise, the other smiled at him.
That is true, and I knew without a doubt when I met the proof of it in the form of that child. The poor boy she bore for Fengor was abandoned, and they secretly brought my son into the palace to replace him. I'm sure this was discovered at the time. Gareth was tolerated only for the sake of appearance, but they hated him all his life, because the king knew he was mine. How it must have irked him. When finally he had allowed the priests to force her to destroy herself for practicing the art, he must have sighed in relief.
What you call the art? It was against the law?
Lund seemed incredulous.
It was. That is a tale we have not the time to explore today. Let me just say that it had to do with Lord Cale you saw in the Portal Vale, and the great plan of the Deceiver. That is why I know less of it than you, who were forbidden its knowledge altogether. We were made to hate and distrust it in essence.
He became suddenly serious and lowered his voice.
The jewels of Crystal. You can draw them out into armor.
I don't have to,
Lund replied.
They are part of the blade. While I am aware of it, they are there too.
Rune pondered this strange answer. Perhaps he was trying too hard, thinking too much on things that had to be sensed with something other than conscious thought. Part of the blade. He looked at Brennick, sitting a few feet away, pretending not to listen to the conversation. Surely this child could not command the armor of a Septalian. As if the boy had read his thoughts, he looked up suddenly and nodded. The jewel at his throat caught the slanting shaft of sunlight, flashing across his young face. His voice was a little shy.
You don't have to ask them like the blade. It feels right. Like when the notes of one voice matches another in a song. Once you know the parts that make up the whole, you listen for all of them.
Rune knew he was trying to express the concept of harmony, a composition of many facets, forming a unique texture and tone that was somehow greater than the sum of the individual parts.
It is like the letters.
Lund interjected.
The letters that make up words. Powerful meanings can be formed if you know the sequence to use.
It was really that simple, Rune thought. Only the meanings at the heart of these symbols were not the motives of mortals, but rather the laws and principles of a higher order. It was fear, he realized, that undermined one's ability to accept such wonders as a matter of course. His pathetic fear that still strove against the forgiveness of those he had wronged. He had no clear harmony in his inner thought, no word to form from the jumble of letters in the Septalian. How would one probe such a mystery? He ventured another question.
What is the word you discovered?
Lund shrugged.
I know not its exact meaning, simply its shape. It is written on the blade when all the pieces unite. Then I know it spells out the things I want more than any other. It reveals my desires, and my name.
There was a startling sensation, as if all the whispered allusions and insinuations had suddenly fallen into place, ceasing abruptly their games of equivocation. Rune knew what this youth had told him was the essential truth of it, though his reason and speculation could not own it as such. The images conjured by their dream in the towers had sprung from his own desire, marred and clouded though it had become during long cycles of hurt and depravity. Almost absent-mindedly, he took a proffered waterskin from Brennick and lifted it to his lips. The water was cool, brought from a nearby stream, and he drank deeply. He passed it on to the others and leaned back in the tall Genesis grass. Closing his eyes, he conjured up memories of Mumboard, the anger, the betrayal, and the unbelievable purposeful blindness that had dragged him like a slave through the streets of that walled slum. He was not that man anymore. His actions then brought nothing but shame and abhorrence to him now. Lund's voice reached through the nebulous visions.
You must hate him very much for what he did to you.
Rune weighed these words in his mind, looking for the familiar upsurge of emotion that accompanied any memory of his brother. It was a relief to find an emptiness instead, a void that he had not known was there, and cared not if it ever be filled.
I used to. But I found that I could not hold on to that hate and recapture love at the same time. There is room for only one, and I chose the former in my ignorance of the fact that the latter had not passed me by. My hate never purchased for me any fulfillment. It was a burden that chained me to base selfishness and meaningless pursuits. While I entertained it, my brother still had the mastery of me, dictating my thoughts and depriving me of happiness. I was doing his work for him, and in that prison I would have remained, had not a brave soul dared to release me at great cost.
He opened his eyes to meet those of Lund.
We were all slaves and exiles in one way or another. I have not come back here to rescue the Nuria that was, its deliberate ignorance and base cruelty. I will strike, like you, for what I know it ought to be, a haven and refuge for those who would be true and free above all else.
There was a slow nod from the youth. His lips formed into a smile, while in his eyes Rune could read a perfect harmony with the sentiments he had just expressed. The noonday sun was high in a cerulean sky above the city of Belruth. King Lucain of Nuria lifted his voice in triumph, giving the long-awaited command to open the southern gate. A wild cheer went up from the walls, the courtyard, the towers. An unlooked-for deliverance had appeared. They were free from the terror of the scourge. Men of rank pressed close behind him as he waited impatiently for the guards to comply. He looked over them disdainfully. The faces were haggard, showing the strain of these dark days, the short rations, the long watches. There were but 5 of them remaining. Pity. He should have spared a priest or two, if only for the sake of lending an air of solemnity to any procession. Behind them, the newly appointed captain of the Royal Guard was forming up his squad of scarlet-circleted cadets. At least these numbered about 30 or so, and they looked fine in their uniforms bearing the gilt dragon, making up for what they lacked in stature. It was a relief to know that they would no longer be required to fight. The Royal Guard lacked 1 in their number that hour, however. Den had been about to join his comrades in the courtyard when an iron grip had closed on his arm, and he was pulled unceremoniously into the shadow of a heavy archway guarding the entrance to the keep. The voice hissed urgently in his ear.
There, what did I tell you? Here he goes, putting himself at the mercy of that schemer. Don't join the squad just now, boy. Watch and see first.
Den was disconcerted, unsure of what to do.
Euban, let me go. I have to be out there. It is my duty.
Do the bit with duty to a madman. If all goes well, which I doubt, then you can tell them I detained you on urgent business. And that may well be the truth within the hour.
He turned towards the heavy doors, dragging the unwilling boy after him.
Quick! We'll make our way to the roof, where we can keep an eye on proceedings.
Den let himself be persuaded. All the strange events of the past season had augmented his suspicions, and the old man's apparent paranoia had found a willing listener in him. Too many coincidences and inexplicable happenings pointed to foul play from the Southern Lord. Now these fearful events had placed the Nurian nation firmly within the grip of that potentate. He was in a position to do with it as he pleased. Outside the thick walls, they could hear a renewed cheering as the royal party stepped through the open gate of the city, escorted by the paltry remnant of their guard. Up the steps they sped, taking two at every stride. Cuban fumbled the key ring in hasty fingers once they reached the locked door leading to the roof, then grabbed it from him, his hand shaking also, and the man touched the right key for the lock. He turned stiffly, and shoved open the door with impatience. A great cry went up from the spectators as soon as it swung open. There was no joy this time, only dismay. Together they stumbled to the edge of the walkway to look over the low wall. Lucain saw a corresponding group of dignitaries detach itself from the main body of the southern host. It came advancing towards the city, partially obscured by the smoke billowing from the huge pile of swarmling carcasses. Perhaps 15 figures in all, cloaked and hooded, walked along the road with slow, purposeful strides. Despite the smile already fixed on his features, the young king found his fingers trembling nervously where they rested on the hilt of his blade. Something about this deliberate march stirred an uneasy memory of that nighttime assault in the Tristwood. He had witnessed that night from his wooden platform the heretofore unknown potency of the southern realm, and it had frightened him. Now he would meet the lords who had honed such power into the host he saw before his gates this day. The king halted his group 10 paces outside the gate, allowing the small guard to deploy in 2 thin rows behind them. He noticed 2 columns of armored figures, huge muscular warriors dressed in black, keeping pace with the detachment in front, though 20 paces or so behind them, and on both sides of the road. Each group, about 50 in number, walked with the same slow, stately pace as the lead. He marveled at the size of them, head and shoulders above ordinary men. Where had the Swamp Lord acquired such specimens? Malik Yulian led the party in person. He was the only figure not hooded among the 15 that made it up. An old man in gray walked at his right hand, his face obscured by the hood of his cloak. 13 others came behind, all similarly attired, yet in darker shades. The Lord of Taralan came up to the King of Nuria before the gates of Belruth. Lucain looked upon the ageless features of Malik the Undying, and his smile faded. He inclined his head in the customary show of respect. There was an answering nod from the figure before him. In that moment he became aware as never before of his utter vulnerability before the power of this master manipulator. His voice, however, betrayed nothing of this disconcerting realization.
A most gracious welcome, my lord, to you and your great host. You arrived to honor our covenant at the most crucial hour, and we are ever in your debt.
He raised his head up to the crowded walls and shouted,
"Hail to our deliverer!"
There was an answering cheer from the people, thunderous and drawn out. Before it faded, Lucain stretched out his hand to the Shadow Lord and greeted him cordially. The latter spoke loudly to be heard above the din.
As always, we are glad to be of service, Lord King.
Lucain felt the smile return to his face. An odd little emphasis on the last word went unnoticed. He freed his hand from the other's grasp and swept his arm in the direction of the open gates behind.
The city of Belruth welcomes you, Lord Malik, as does every other town within the realm of Nuria from this day forth.
The guardsmen parted down the middle to let the dignitaries through. The Southland warriors formed up behind, dwarfing them in stature and number, to reinforce the guard of honor. Both parties strode forward into the city to general acclaim. The grey cloak whispered something unintelligible to Malik, who smiled in return. Many people had come down from the walls by now, crowding into the courtyard to welcome the rescuers. They competed with one another to catch a glimpse of the imposing southern century in their tall helms and smoke-stained armor. This would be a day to remember and celebrate for many cycles to come. Lord Malik strode into the center of the yard, looking about him scornfully. Behind him, the lofty eyes spread out in a half-circle, their quick gaze gauging any possible threat. Lucain was a few paces ahead, purposely ignoring the shivers running up his spine. Finally, the ruler of Taralan halted, and a gust of laughter burst from his lips. The king whirled about, his heart growing cold within him. A voice, stripped of polite pretense, filled with raw and unwavering hate, lashed out at him.
I thank you, princeling, for the ease of this final victory. You were ever as great a fool as your fathers before you. I will remember your contribution and make your demise as swift as possible.
Lucain stared, horror-struck. The red madness engulfed him instantly, turning his voice to a scream of rage.
What do you mean by this? Explain yourself!
Alex spoke 2 names and snapped his fingers.
Torek, Rinas.
Behind him, the air convulsed as 2 of the shifters took on their chains. The whirlwind of dust and debris rose from the broken stones in the yard, the other cloaked figures backing away quickly to avoid being caught in it. A wail of dismay rose from the onlookers as the beasts spread their wings, beating back the dust and falling fragments. They rose from the vortex, irresistibly huge, leaving the stunned crowd to scramble for safety, climbing over one another in complete abandon. 2 small craters remained where the figures of men had stood before. Lucain drew the blade from its sheath, though his fingers could hardly keep their grip on it.
To me, men!
His voice broke, a feeble braying in the face of the lion about to devour him. Already his guard had been overwhelmed by the dark century, and lay scattered about the stones in pathetic heaps of twisted limbs and torn scarlet. Malik stepped forward with a purpose. Outside the walls, rising above the din of panicked flight, the drums of the vanguard had started up again.
Out of my way, worm!
There was no need to lift a finger. 2 of the tour champions struck down the hapless king, who had not even the opportunity to raise an arm in his defense. The ragdoll that was Lucain sprawled at the feet of Horan, his blade unkindled and uncomposed. From the walls and towers, where the Nurian sergeants tried in vain to organize a resistance, rose an anguished cry at the sight.
The king! The king has fallen!
High above, the Loctii prepared for their descent upon the defenders. Malik ignored the body, stepping over it on his way to the keep doorway. Around him, the black wall of his champions closed in to protect him from stray missiles or desperate enemies. But there was hardly any need. Already the Amul warriors were swarming in through the open gate. Then turned away from the edge in horror. Cuban was already halfway to the door, screaming for the boy to follow. He caught up with the older man on the stairs. His voice was the squealing of a little child.
What are we going to do?
There was no response.
Cuban!
Save your breath!
They stepped into the main hallway, not pausing or slowing down, and down past the mess hall, past the barracks they raced, heading for the temple. Here at last they halted, breathing heavily. Neither dared to think on what was happening outside.
What are we doing?
Then it regained a little of his composure.
We will fetch a tapestry from the store and hide this door from view.
Euban indicated the passage to the right, leading away to the higher level where the weapon and clothing stores were located. Here he had spent many cycles as storeman.
We will hide inside it and pray there are others who will be as wise.
Then regarded him skeptically.
What happens if they burn down the place?
Euban shrugged.
Then we roast with the others.